Unit 1. Types of business entities. There are 10 main types of business entities in Cyprus. Under the Companies Law, Cap. 113, a company is a legal entity that is formed and registered under this law or an existing company. Most of the companies in Cyprus are established in the form of a private company limited by shares, limited. This form is the one that most foreign investors choose to set up a company in Cyprus. Another common form is also a sole proprietor, SP. Sole proprietors, or sole traders, are individuals who own and run a business on their own account with or without employees. In Cyprus, there are no official procedures for setting up a sole proprietor, and sole proprietorship falls under the Cypriot Partnership and Business Names Law, Cap 116. Through the module, we will focus on these two most common forms, and information on other forms of business entities can be found in Annex 1.1. The majority of the business organizations in Cyprus are limited liability companies. Limited liability companies are governed by Cap 113 and are subdivided into 1. Companies limited by shares. Public companies. Private companies. 2. Companies limited by guarantee, where members give a guarantee to pay a stated sum in the event of winding up. Generally, these are incorporated as non-profit making organizations, and their importance for FDI Advisors is minimal. 3. Unlimited companies, where the liability of members in the event of winding up is unlimited. A private company limited by shares, limited, is the most popular type of company in Cyprus and is a legal entity, which is separate from that of its members who may change over time. According to Cap 113, the precise definition of private company is a company which by its articles A. restricts the right to transfer its shares, and B. limits the number of its members to 50, not including persons who are in the employment of the company and persons who, having been formerly in the employment of the company, were a while in that employment, and have continued after the determination of that employment to be members of the company, and C. prohibits any invitation to the public to subscribe for any shares or debentures of the company. Provided that the shares in private company may be held by one and only person, either upon the formation of the company or by their subsequent acquisition by one and only person, Cap 113(29). Therefore, it is important that there is no minimum share capital required in Cyprus, and the number of the shareholders set up limited in Cyprus is limited to 50. Moreover, the stakeholders are liable to the company's obligations only to the extent of their contribution. A public company is a corporation that does not fulfill the definition of a private company under Cap 113 and is controlled in a stricter format by the registrar. It requires minimum 7 members, and its main feature is the power to extend an invitation to the public to subscribe to its shares. Establishment of a limited company is very safe from the point of view of protection of personal property. This is very important when there are more than one founders, and the wrong business moves will not harm substantially anyone. In the case of a one-person company, it is worthwhile to evaluate all the effects of different business forms and to decide which type of company that best suits the interests of the foreign investor. Here you can see a table comparing sole proprietorship and private companies limited by shares. A sole proprietor, SP, is a business entity in one. It is a natural person who performs a profitable activity on his own account and is registered with the Cyprus Register of Companies under Cap 116. A sole proprietor is a self-employed person who does not pay salaries, bonuses and other bonuses to himself, who would otherwise belong to regular employees in other forms of business entities. However, he must join the compulsory insurance system and pay social security contributions. A sole proprietorship, also called a sole trader, in Cyprus, is one of the most basic types of business on the island. Sole proprietorship means having a single owner that entirely manages the business company. This type of legal entity, according to the legislation in Cyprus, is not considered a legal person. Consequently, there is no distinction between the entity and the proprietor who assumes all the rights and obligations of the sole trader. Sole traders' profits are eligible for income tax, whether the profits are distributed to the proprietor or left in the business. The legal entity has to abide by all the appropriate regulations and statutory requests like registering with the Inland Revenue Department, the social insurances and the VAT service. In this form of business, it is interesting to know that a sole proprietor can freely dispose of earnings and can transfer it to household consumption whenever necessary. However, for his business operations he is responsible with his entire assets, which in the event of bad business this poses a risk of losing personal assets. Running a sole proprietor is easy, as it only requires the management of basic accounting records and compliance with the rules that apply to the charging of services. As sole proprietor is not considered a legal person, there is no distinction between the entity and the proprietor who assumes all the rights and obligations of the sole trader will receive all the profits of the business and will pay the applicable taxes, such as income tax on the profit. The sole proprietor is thus liable for all the debts of the business. This type of business entity is worth considering if the future business does not pose a risk to the loss of an entrepreneur's personal assets. It will have a smaller annual turnover, for example up to €50,000 per year, or the activity will be simple, for example renting a property, intellectual activities. The income taxation for sole traders in Cyprus. If the income earned is of maximum €28,000, the sole trader is taxed with a fixed rate of 20%. If the income is of maximum €36,300, the sole trader is taxed with 25%. For an income of up to €60,000, the tax rate is 30%. If the income is above €60,000, the sole trader in Cyprus is taxed at a rate of 35%. Here you can see a table describing the advantages and disadvantages of sole proprietorship.